Good morning, everyone. My name is Indorsh, and we're going to have a webinar this morning covering workers' compensation claims start to finish. Thank you for joining me. I don't know what level you've had with Wisconsin workers' compensation claims, but hopefully we'll be able to answer some of the questions that will come up for you if you're handling them. Susan Dorsch. I've had 35 years of experience in the claims. The last 20 years have been handling workers' compensation claims in the state of Wisconsin. So I can't say that I've seen everything that will come up, but I have seen quite a few of the different types of that people will see. In overview, what we're going to cover today is listed here. The items that are shown on this page are actually an overview of the various things that will come up in claims while you're handling them. Workers' compensation can be confusing for you if you don't have many claims. The state of Wisconsin expects all employers or adjusters to what these rules are and to know these components of the claims. They don't really give the employer any sort of leeway in saying, well, just because you didn't understand that, we're not going to do a difficult time with it. So looking at the first report of injury, we're going to concentrate a little bit more on this, filling out and some of the reasons why the information in there needs to be reported. We'll also cover the temporary total disability rate and the average weekly wage and how that's determined. A little bit into the 3-day waiting period. We'll cover the information on definition of indemnity and medical reserves. We're also going to spend quite a bit of time on the doctor slip and the importance of this in the workers' compensation claim. We'll give a bit of a definition of what are called TTD, TPD, and PPD. Your adjusters and insurance people using that terminology, and hopefully will give you some idea what they mean when they say that. And then we'll go into the final document that's always found on a workers' compensation claim. It's called the final medical report. And this document is sort of the final to the puzzle that allows a claim to close and you move on when you have a workers' compensation claim. This is a copy of the first report of injury, and I'm going to go over some of the components of this and why it's important that you fill these things out. So this on the far left of the document, there's going to be a black bar going down on the side, and the bar is going to show you on the very top the information for the employee. The second there is the information on the employer. The third block on there is going to be information on the wages. And the part of the document is going to show information on if you know what the injury is, what body part is involved. And so if they're treating with a doctor, that information is going to be on there as well. Go to the top on this document where it says employee. You're going to want to make sure that you put in information here related to the employee's name, address, and telephone number. If you don't have that information, the adjuster cannot contact the worker, and it's more difficult. Also at the top, you'll notice they're asking for the Social Security number, the sex individual, the date of birth, and how long they've been working for you or for the employer. The state of Wisconsin will not allow a workers' compensation claim to be set up if it's a lost time claim, if it is not, including the Social Security number and the date of birth. Something that the state does on here, they will monitor Social Security numbers to make sure that they match with the name of the individual. And if you lost time claim, that will be submitted to the state of Wisconsin. So the Social Security number is something you work, and the date of birth, make sure that you have that on any claim that you're filling out, any first report. Here's information. They're going to want to know the name and address of the employer, and you'll notice on the far right there's the employer's federal tax ID number or FIN, F-E-I-N number. You make sure that you put that in. You don't need to know the federal tax ID number of the insurance carrier. They'll take care of that information if a claim is submitted to the state. Do not have to send these in to the state. You only send these to your insurance carrier. It used to be that you would send these directly to the state of Wisconsin. That hasn't been in place for a very long time, so you don't need to worry about doing that. The next part of this document is called the wage information. And there's going to be a couple of different things that you want to fill in, particularly if you have a claim where your employee is going to be off of work. One of them is the hourly rate at the time of the injury and the number of hours that they were scheduled to work that week. So if you have an employee making $10 an hour, you're going to put $10 an hour, and you're going to put down that they worked 40 hours a week. The other item that the state's going to require is the gross earnings for the 52 weeks prior to the date of injury. So what that means is that in an example of this week, say the injury occurred in the week that we're currently in, which starts on a Monday, September 14th, that means that the state wants you to give the gross earnings for the 52 weeks with the week starting prior to the week that the injury occurred in. So you would start with the week ending on September 12th and go back and get the gross earnings for 52 weeks prior to that date. Have a lost time claim. Both of these pieces of information are going to be required for the state. It's easier if you have it when you're submitting the claim rather than trying to find it later. So just keep that in mind. It makes it a little bit easier for you. And then down a little further on the document, you're going to see the injury date is listed. You're going to find out that last day worked is listed. They want to know what the last day worked was. That becomes a very important point on a claim. And then they're going to put on there the date that the employer was notified. And the date the employer was notified can be different than the date that the workers' compensation claim submitted. So you will need to know when, if your employee reports it to a supervisor or they report it to a coworker, whatever that date is, it should be going in there where it says the date the employer was notified. And if you go down further, it's going to ask you, or across the same line, go to the area where it says return to work. If your employee is back to work the next day, you can simply put the date that they return to work, or if you think they're going to be off longer, you can leave that one blank because you don't know exactly when they're going to be returning to work. Go further down, you're going to fill in the injury description, and also if you know the name of the doctor that your employee is treating with. On the very bottom of the document, who is filling out this report? Put your name, your number, your position within the company, and also the date that you're filling this out. Now, you'll notice the date at the bottom is that the workers' compensation first report of injury is being submitted, but you see it could be different from the date it was reported to the employer, which is up a little bit higher up by the injury date. The reason that this becomes important for anyone who's completing these forms is that the state of Wisconsin states that if an injured worker isn't paid for lost time within 14 days from the date of injury, they can do a fine to the employer for not reporting that claim timely. So whenever there's a claim that becomes controversial or has difficulty, those will be two issues that will always surface. So the more information you can fill in on this form while you're doing it, the better off you're going to be. So just for the things that we talked about on here, because some of the things that we come up with later are going to relate back to the information on this first report of injury. So looking at it from an adjuster standpoint, you're going to know the name of that employee, you're going to know how old they are, you're going to know what their job description is if they're doing heavy work, you're also going to know how long they've been working for that employer. It also gives them an idea of the body part that's involved and whether they're going to be off of work. So this can be important for an adjuster to know what to do on that claim, because they're going to know that, let's just state, for example, the gentleman is 57 years old. He does masonry work and does heavy lifting. He's worked for an employer for 1 day, and he was lifting something and hurt his lower back. All going to be information that the adjuster is going to use to determine how to set up that claim. So now to the next screen. So these are some of the takeaways from the first report of injury includes a Social Security number, date of birth, and the employee and employer contact information. Most likely when a claim comes through, the adjuster is going to want to talk to the employer first to make sure that there aren't any red flags or problems coming up with this claim. Sometimes are, and they would like to know that from the employer before they contact the injured worker. So going to want to document again the date that the employer is notified of an injury and then the date that the loss report is submitted to the insurance carrier. This could protect the employer in the future for any fines that can come on claims. So report of injury is filed. A lot of employers will say, okay, I've turned in the claim, everything's done, now I can just sit back and let the insurance company handle the claim. And then to a point, but the employer is also going to have to be involved and in communication with that adjuster pretty regularly until the claim reaches a conclusion. If you have all of the information right away when the claim is being submitted, send it in anyway. You all want to have workers' compensation claims reported within 24 to 48 hours after a claim occurs. If you're sure about submitting a claim, you can always talk to your insurance carrier and adjuster. You can call your agent. Another time they will be able to help you if you don't know for sure if you should submit a claim. And then again, on lost time claims, if it's reported more than 14 days after an injury occurs and that employee has been off of work, the state issue a fine to the employer or to the insurance carrier, whoever is really late about sending that claim in. And most adjusters, the first thing they're going to ask you when that claim comes in is the employee off of work? The reason to be asking you that is that they want to make sure that any lost time claims are paid within that 14-day period of time. Before you have your claims, make sure you know who your insurance carrier is. So if there's an email address that they require you to email it to them, that's fine. Some of them will have you call them in only. You can't email them in. Some of them allow you to email, call, or fax them in. Make sure you have that information for whoever at your business or as the employer that you're going to have that information ready to go so that when you have a claim, you're knowing what to do next. If you don't know where your claims should be going, you can also call your agent or the insurance company and make sure that you get that information ahead of time. If you want the state form, the first report of injury WKC-12 form, we've provided you with a couple of links here where you can get that form. The first one is going to be the state of Wisconsin. This is the link to their website. If you type in WKC-12, then you will get a copy of that. You can download it. What I recommend is that employers download it and save it on their desktop. Then if they have claims, they can fill in the document and then mail it or fax it from the site. Keep a copy for yourself, but use the template over and over again. You can also get this form on our website. We've included a link to that as well. Or if you're really struggling and you're not able to get this and you want some help, we have copies we can send to you as well. It's no problem. Just let us know, and we'll know that we get one to you. This is going to be a term that comes up a lot, particularly with lost time claims. It's called temporary total disability rate, or TTD. The temporary total disability rate is the rate that the insurance company is going to pay the injured worker when they're off of work. It's based on 2/3 of the average weekly wage for that employee. Now in the loss report, we were talking about the gross earnings for 52 weeks and also the hourly rate multiplied by the number of hours worked, which is usually 40 hours. The state of Wisconsin will ask us as adjusters to pay whichever is higher of the two. So for example, take 52 weeks of gross earnings and divide it by 52 and you end up with $300, or you take the hourly multiplied by 40 hours and you get $275. The state says that the $300 or the high amount is the one they're going to use as the average weekly wage. The average weekly wage in the example here is $300, which means that when the injured worker is receiving payment on a weekly basis by the insurance carrier, they're going to be paid on 2/3 of that amount, or $200 a week. As it's important for you to realize that the temporary total disability monies being paid to your employee is not taxed when doing their taxes at the end of the year. So all of the money that your employee is getting for workers' compensation, lost wages, is not going to be something when they do their taxes that they will be taxed on. The other important point here is that unemployment compensation for the state of Wisconsin is taxable, and a lot of times an employee's average weekly wage will mean that they're paid more on temporary total disability, which again is not taxable, as opposed to unemployment compensation, which is taxable. You need to, as an employer or someone handling these claims, you need to be aware that if there's a pattern of people who are going out on workers' compensation claims right at the time that they would be put on layoff, or would get off for the winter, for example, and that's when you have your workers' compensation claim filed, that can be a red flag for you, that maybe the employees have realized that the workers' compensation benefit is a better financially than it is unemployment compensation in Wisconsin. The unemployment rate in Wisconsin is like $360 or $365 a week. It can be a red flag. You can talk about it with your agent or your adjuster if that should come up, and they can also maybe give you some information or maybe some direction if you feel that this is a situation that may be occurring for you. A little bit about the 3-day waiting period. Every state has different statutes on what the waiting period is going to be. Some states it might be 2 weeks, some states it might be 1 week, but in Wisconsin we have what's called a 3-day waiting period. There's no payment to the injured worker for that 3-day waiting period in most cases if they're off only for those 3 days. So the injury or the date that the injury occurs for that injured worker is never covered as part of a 3-day waiting period. A lot of questions from employers saying, well, who pays the employee then on the date that they were injured? And the way that it's written is that there's no law that says the employer has to pay the employee on the date of injury, but most employers do pay the employee. So, for example, you have an employee coming into work at 8 a.m. He has his work injury at 8:30 in the morning and leaves work for the day. He will not get paid for the rest of that day because there's no payment for the date of injury. So some employers will make up that payment, some will not, but it's not required that you do. And then the Wisconsin statute also notes that if that disability extends beyond 7 calendar days, now that's an important word, calendar days, then the 3-day waiting period is waived, and the adjuster will go back and pick up those 3 days and still, though, never pay for the date of injury. So for September, if you use the date of September 7th as the date of injury, it's the one showing up in yellow. So you'll notice that the date of injury is never paid. So when an adjuster is looking at this next 3 days as the 3-day waiting period, those are the days that are blocked in red. Okay, there's no payment for the injured worker on that date. Also, the state of Wisconsin works and has it up as a 6-day work week, which goes from Monday through Saturday. Some employers will say, why are you paying my injured worker for Saturday? They never work on a Saturday. The state of Wisconsin has it as a 6-day work week, so if you're only paying for a couple days of lost time, the state says that it's divided up into 6 days and not 5, so they're getting a little bit less money on that date. But this is a question that comes up very frequently. Why is that injured worker being paid for Saturday when they don't work on a Saturday? It's because of the way that the statutes are written in Wisconsin. So let's look at this and say from the 8th of September, we're going to start counting 7 calendar days. So 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and the 14th. And on the 14th, you'll notice that the doctor has said that that employee can return to work on the 14th. That means that there has not been lost time for 7 calendar days, which means that the adjuster would pay them for the 11th and the 12th because the day waiting period would apply. That injured worker is still off of work on the 14th and maybe they're still off of work on the 16th, the 17th, and the 18th. That means that the adjuster will waive those 3 days in red, the waiting period, and they will go back and start paying the lost wages starting on the 8th as opposed to starting them on the 11th. So you as an employer, you want to bring your employee back to work with light duty, or you're looking at possibly finding light duty, you have 3 days to be able to put that information together. So like if the worker is injured on the 7th, and you get a doctor's slip from your employee, and you show one immediately, but if you get a doctor's slip that says they can return to with light duty, and you have light duty that you can start them on, say, on the 11th, your claim will not have any lost time, will be a medical-only claim. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of why that's important, but we do webinars out there, too, that talk about return to work and the importance of doing that. It's a transitional return to work. The webinar, I believe, is from one of the other claims people here, Hausmann-Johnson. Her name is Peg Kramer, and she did a webinar, I believe, in June of this year that deals with transitional return to work. So if anyone's interested, you can go on the website and also look at that webinar. It's recorded there. I'm not going to go over everything on this page, but this is some of the information that we just talked about as far as what dates would be paid for lost wages and what dates would not. Now into doctor slips, and this is the other point that I wanted to really kind of go into a little more detail on. It's extremely important that you get from the injured worker a doctor slip as soon as possible after an injury. Remember that 3-day waiting period that we're talking about? You want to see if you can get this from your employee within 24 hours of them seeking medical treatment. And it's really important because the doctor slip is sort of the of this claim. It's going to be affecting everything that goes on with this claim. It's going to deal with how much money that employee is going to be paid for lost days from work. It's going to determine what kind of medical treatment that person is going to get. It's also going to determine if light duty work is going to be available. It's also going to determine if that employee can return to work and when the treatment ends. So doctor slip is really that pass for that employee to be off of work or to have certain kinds of medical treatment done. All decisions are made by the actual doctor. Again, the doctor slip determines if they can return to work or not, if they can do light duty. And again, if you want to find out more about light duty, we do have a webinar on that. The doctor slip is updated every time the employee goes back to the doctor for a follow-up visit. So if they have another appointment 2 weeks down the road and they are off work for 2 weeks, and they go back to the doctor and the doctor says that, they're going to have any restrictions or they're still off of work, that should be updated every 2 to 3 weeks. An employee who comes in with a doctor slip that says that they're going to be off work for 6 months, that's unacceptable. It should never go beyond 2 to 3 weeks unless it's been some sort of major surgery where you know that there's no way that person can come back to work for, several weeks. But they should always be providing you with a doctor slip. If the employee doesn't provide it to you, sometimes employees realize the importance of that document, which is actually their part of the claim. That's their responsibility to make sure they get that to you. You have a right to get it, and you demand it from that employee. You have every right to do so. Hopefully they will give it to you within 24 hours. If the employee does not bring that in to you, don't be to call the doctor's office and ask them to provide that to you. They have no problem getting that to you. If the doctor is not available, ask for the nurse for that doctor. Some clinics have a specific workers' compensation department that answers these kinds of questions because it is that the employer knows what's going on that claim. Remember I said, your work is never done on these. You're going to be following up on this claim for the life of the claim, along with the adjuster. And the other thing on doctor slips, HIPAA laws do not apply to the medical condition or injury that the employee is treating for that is work-related. And if they're treating for something else like diabetes or they're pregnant, those kinds of issues cannot be discussed with you. But the treatment plan, the diagnosis for what that work injury is, you have every right as an employer to get that information under the workers' compensation statutes in Wisconsin. If somebody at a medical clinic, say you're calling to get information and they're telling you that they don't want to give that to you for HIPAA reasons, you can tell them that this is a workers' compensation claim and you would like to speak to the nurse for Dr. John Doe so that you can get information on the injured worker. Doctor slip will also let you know when that employee is done treating and when they're allowed to return to their regular job duties. Again, it's very important that if an employee has been off work for a length of time but has not been seen by a medical doctor, the coverage for lost wages does not begin until that employee actually seeks medical treatment. So all of this is you have an employee who calls you on Monday morning. He says, I really hurt my back on Friday. I'm in a lot of pain. I don't think I can come into work today. I just wanted to let you know I'm off of work. Okay, so that employee sits at home for a week or a week and a half before he goes in to seek medical treatment. A situation like that, that employee will not be paid for that time off because the doctor slip and being seen by a doctor, their claim begins. So let's say 16 days after the injury, that employee finally goes in to the family doctor. That becomes the new date of injury, and there will be no payment for the date that he sees that medical doctor. The 3-day waiting period then will begin 3 days after that first initial doctor's visit. So if you as an employer have anyone who's off of work saying, I'm not going in to see the doctor right away, I'm going to wait a week to go in, tell them that they will not be paid for that time that they're sitting at home. And if they go to the doctor 16 days later, they can ask the doctor to backdate that doctor slip going back to the time that they've been off. They can only have the doctor slip from the date they're actually seen. They also cannot call the doctor and tell the doctor, I'm injured and I need to be off of work. You can't do that. So as an employer, make sure that if you have employees who are off of work, make sure that you either let them know or make sure that you are aware that they will not be paid for time until they actually seek medical treatment. One reason why these doctor slips are, like I said, the holy grail. Everything in this claim depends on what goes on with doctor slip. Now touch just briefly on reserves on a file. When an adjuster gets the claim, remember we talked about they look at all the information that you filled in on that first report of injury. They're going to decide how much money they need to set up on that claim. So if somebody who cut his finger and they just go in for a doctor's visit to get some stitches and maybe a follow-up visit, but they're working, the adjuster is only going to set up a medical reserve. If they have losses or there's a surgery that's occurring, they're going to be setting up the second reserve on this page, the indemnity reserve. So the medical reserve setup is money that's reserved or set aside on that particular file by insurance adjuster. It's like a little bank account of money that they think that they're going to spend on that claim. So on the medical reserve, it pays for doctor's visits, hospital bills, physical therapy, chiropractors, prescriptions, and it also pays your employee mileage to go to doctor's appointments. So if you have an injured worker that's got a lot of physical therapy appointments and maybe they have to travel quite a distance to get to the physical therapy, have them keep track of the number of miles to and from that visit because they can be reimbursed for mileage going to that appointment. You can't get mileage for going to pick up your prescriptions. It's only for doctors, physical therapy, practitioners, that type of thing. And then the indemnity reserve, again, that's the reserve that's set up to pay for lost wages and any permanent partial disability that might be assigned due to the type of injury that your employee has. Now, it's important for you, if you're an employer out there listening to this, that you know what these reserves are. There's a document that should come out to you. I recommend that you get it monthly. Some people get it on a quarterly basis. It's called the loss run. So who your insurance carrier is or your agent, you can ask them to set this up so that you will receive a monthly or a quarterly copy of the loss run. I'm going to list all of the workers' compensation claims that you have, whether it's money that's paid on that claim already and how much money is still sitting in reserve on that claim. You should always be aware of what claims are open and what kind of money is on there. If you think it's too much, you can talk to your agent or adjuster, and they can help you with that as well. So your experience mod, and I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with that, but the experience mod is the rate that you're paying for workers' compensation premium. Experience mod and your premium depends on how much money is spent on these claims and how much money is even set aside in reserves on these claims. So it's important that you know what's going on with all of the details of claims so that there's no surprises when you all of a sudden say, why is my insurance premium going up so high? It may have to do with money that's being set aside on these reserves and these loss funds. So if you aren't already getting them, see if you can get your insurance person to get them for you. So now here's a couple of definitions for employees. They're off of work or if they're off work for part-time. There's temporary total disability. This is lost wages paid to an employee when they're completely off of work. And then the temporary part disability or TPD. This is when an employee has an injured worker coming back to work either on a part-time basis or coming back full-time on light duty but at a lesser rate of pay. So each week on a temporary partial disability setting will pay the employee for the hours that they're working, and the adjuster will pay them for any lost wages that they're having above and beyond what the employer is already paying. So if you have an employee that's on temporary partial disability or TPD, they'd be receiving a paycheck from you for the hours they work. They should also be getting a check each week from the adjuster for the loss in wages that they're experiencing because they're not doing their normal regular work. So if you're an employee saying, why am I getting two checks? It's because of temporary partial disability. That's why they would get two of them. Partial disability, which is also under the indemnity reserve that we talked about, deals with ways of paying an employee for specific really bad injuries or certain types of surgeries. So Wisconsin translates that body part into dollars or into money because that employee has an injury. For example, you lost part of a finger or you lose an eye in a workers' compensation claim, the state of Wisconsin will translate that injury into a certain number of weeks of permanency at a specified rate. The adjuster will pay that permanency to the injured worker based on how many weeks the state says that they will be paying for that permanency. So you may also have it if somebody has a head injury or a back injury. If they have surgery, sometimes they will get a permanency rating for that as well. And you know, the final permanency rating will be coming from the employee's treating doctor. So again, it kind of goes back to that doctor slip. And all the information then is going to be on that document. So once the employee is released by the doctor to return to work and is done treating, the decision is made of what that final outcome will be for that injured worker. For example, will they return to their normal job? Are they going to have some permanent restrictions? All of those things will cover when that employee is released by the doctor, when they say everything is done, he doesn't need any further medical treatment. So if the employee is off work for more than 3 weeks or some types of injuries have occurred, a final medical report or a WKC-16 form must be completed by the doctor and provided to the state of Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development. This document looks like. You can get this form also on that link that we gave you for the first report of injury. You can type in WKC-16 or WKC-16B and you can get a copy of this document. You should be familiar with how this is filled out and the reason that it has to be filled out a certain way. At the very top of the document, they're going to put in what's called the pen, the document that's completed by the doctor for the injured worker. It's going to list insured employee's name. It's going to have a workers' compensation claim number. Notice that it does include Social Security number, but most likely when this document is sent to the doctor, the state of Wisconsin has set up a claim. They've verified the Social Security number of your employee. And there's the injury date at the top. And then the important part, which the adjuster is going to hone in on immediately when they get a completed first WKC-16 like this, is the area where that arrow is showing. You're going to see that the first question is, has permanent disability resulted? The doctor is going to check the box yes or no. If he checks yes that there was permanency, he's going to fill in where the arrow is a number or a percentage of a certain body part. So if someone has a back surgery called a discectomy, is going to give them a 5% rating to the body as a whole, or it means to back. And so we're going to say a 5% rating to the body part. If someone loses an eye, they're going to have 100% to the right eye or the left eye. And that's where the permanency rating is going to be listed. The state of Wisconsin will get this document as well. And also it says the date of the last exam, the last time the doctor saw this employee. Then the doctor's going to note, has the treating period ended? There's a box for yes or no. And then the last one is, are they at an end of healing, yes or no? So on those, if the doctor says no to either one of those, then this is not going to be the final medical report, end up being an interim report, because the doctor has to say that the healing period has ended and all treatment has ended. They have to say yes to both of those boxes on the far right, just above where the arrow is, and that's what the adjuster is going to look for. If it's not done completely, they're going to go back to the doctor and try to get it again. So you may, as an employer, be out there saying, why isn't this claim closed? Everything seems to be going on. They haven't concluded everything. It could be because they're not providing this final medical report. And at the bottom of it, you'll notice where it says there's a date and then the signature of the physician. This has to be signed by the actual physician. It cannot be signed by a nurse. It can be signed by a nurse practitioner. Anyone else in the clinic cannot sign this. It has to actually be signed by a doctor. If all of this information is not completed on here properly and the adjuster sends it to the state will kick it back and say, we're still waiting for a final medical report, which adjusters get really frustrated on. But sometimes doctors refuse to fill these out, or they're really slow in getting them in. So if you hear an adjuster stating that they're waiting for this final medical report, that means that they have been requesting it from the doctor. At this point also, if the doctor says your employee has to come in for one final visit before I can fill out this form, the adjuster may call you to try to see if you can work with that injured worker to make sure that they do go in for that final medical visit so that they can get this final document concluded. As noted, if there's more than 3 weeks of lost time or certain surgeries or injuries occur, a final medical report must be completed by a treating doctor. Legally, under the statutes, this claim cannot be closed if this document is not done. One final report, if it is completed by the state or by the doctor and is turned into the state, if it's filled out properly, the state then looks at this and determine how much permanency that employee should get. The adjuster then will make that payment to the injured worker, and once that's done, they have to notify the state that they've actually paid that money before the state will close the file. Also the time to note whether or not you as an employer can bring that employee back to their regular job or if they cannot. If you have a situation where the restrictions, permanent restrictions given in this final medical report are so severe that they cannot go back to their regular job, you need to talk with the adjuster or someone at your agency, or even discuss this with a corporate attorney, because you may have a situation where if you're not able to bring that employee back to their regular job, that there are other issues here, but it's not always necessarily workers' compensation. You're getting more into HR issues at that point. So if you have a situation like that, make sure that you seek some help to make sure that you handle that situation properly. So one final note on the state of Wisconsin workforce development. You'll notice that all of the temporary total disability, temporary partial disability, and permanent partial disability rates and the periods of time that injured employee is being paid all are reported to the state of Wisconsin by the adjuster that's handling the claim. They'll check to ensure that that temporary total disability rate is accurate based on the wages that you report on that first report of injury. If they disagree with the amount, they will ask the adjuster to pay a different rate of pay or pay for an additional day they'll say that they underpaid an employee and make sure that it's paid. So you as an employer can sometimes get caught up in this situation. So anytime you, for a fact that you filled in earnings for 52 weeks, the hourly rate, and the number of weeks worked per week, the more accurate you can be with that, the less you're going to have to provide as far as information to the state of Wisconsin. Sometimes they want, the actual paycheck information from week by week, and they'll usually do that if the numbers aren't matching up with what they show at the state. The reason why a Social Security number at the beginning is used, and they should be aware of as an employer, is that the State of Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development does both work compensation and unemployment compensation coverages. So looking at that Social Security number to make sure that that employee is not collecting workers' compensation and unemployment compensation at the same time. And they do that based on that Social Security number because an employee cannot collect both of them at the same time. So this is just another way that they will check also to make sure that everything is legitimate with the claim and everything going on in that claim. Everything that I'm covering today, if there's any questions or comments, I believe people may have been submitting questions or comments to us, and we'll be getting into that here. No one any information? I'm assuming that means I went into it in great detail. I hope this didn't put everybody to sleep. Out here. So
our need is nationwide. We have all of our workers' comp claims over the phone to our insurance carrier. We do not complete this form. Mandatory or just recommended that we complete a paper form.
It's not mandatory that you fill out this form. Some of the insurance carriers have already put that form together. They have it online. You fill it in online. They're gathering all of this information. So when they document this to the state, they already have their form. It's perfectly fine if they do that.
Other question through the Q&A chat application. It says, if the doctor says that the employee can return to work, but they not, does the employer still pay the 7 days in full?
They will not. What will be happening is if they are allowed to return to work on a specific date and the employer notified that employee, make sure you let them know in writing so that you can document it. Otherwise, the state says if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. Make sure it's in the form of an email or that employee comes in. But if you've offered them work and the employee does not, the employee does not get paid. It's going to be based on that doctor slip again. That's why I keep telling you how important that doctor slip is. That will determine if that employee can return to work. And if you have light duty within restrictions, they must return to work.
There's a question. You can always just add it over your phone.
The minute off for you.
The question, if you can get a copy of this presentation, I always send out a link to recording of all of our webinars after the webinar is done. So you'll be receiving an email from me in the next 24 hours with the recording of this webinar.
To see if there's any other questions.
Another question. Gary asks, how important is wage information if the employee is not going to miss any time, such as cut or something minor?
The information will not be necessary on a claim where you know that it's going to be just some medical bills only. The wage information is really important if you have a lost time or you think it will be a lost time claim. So if you know, when you're filling it out and when you're notifying the adjuster about a claim and you know that it's just going to be a couple of stitches and they won't be missing any time from work, you can somehow on that report, if you've got a space in, like even where you're filling in the injury, put some information to the adjuster that this will be a medical-only claim or a lost time claim. They will then handle that claim differently. They will not set up any indemnity reserve that we talked about. They will set it up as a medical only.
These are great questions. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to ask Susan at this time? If anyone else has any questions, I'm just going to put this. Go ahead. And so, question? If anyone else has any questions at this time, I've put up Sue's contact information. If you want to take a moment to jot down her email address or her phone number, she would be happy to take questions. You may be sitting and thinking about this for a bit, and if you do have some questions, she's happy to answer those.
Thank you to everybody that listened, and I really appreciate it. I hope that you'll find something in here today that's helpful. You.
Open up our survey. You complete it before we bring up the term and HRCI credit information.
Probably be good to reiterate
Thank you for being with us, and here's the credit information. Thank you again to everybody for paying attention and listening, and we hope to see you in the next webinar.
Thank you.